You're tuned in to the Stingbat Radio Network on FM 101.2 KRPG. Welcome to Dungeon Master Diaries, a podcast about Shadowdark and other role-playing games, where two GMs talk about their recent experiences at the table and hopefully give you something useful that you can take to yours. On the show today, we discuss building a baby boss battle. Hello there, sages and adventurers. My name is Matt, and with me, as always, is my good friend and GM colleague, Jody. Jody, how are you doing today?
Good. I am excited to talk about little things that cause big problems.
Oh, indeed. I am so excited. This is going to be great and much more focused than our last week's episode. Oh, my gosh.
And yet, we're still going to end up right back there.
Oh, boy. All right. Well, today's episode focuses on building a boss battle, more specifically a baby boss battle. So, Jody, take us to the table.
All right. So, we are up to our waists in the Hool Marshes of my Saturday Salt Marsh campaign that is now a few sessions in, and happy with how it's going. Our intrepid adventurers find themselves deep below a lizard man community mound, and the lizard folk, in interest of possible alliance with the nearby town of Saltmarsh, have charged the players with building that relationship and trust and setting out to kill a hated enemy, a dreaded, mutated, dire crocodile deep in the swamp known as Thousand Tooth. Well, our intrepid adventurers take that chance, and they set out across the swamp with a guide and launch an attack against this strange being. But they collected some information first, and they found out that this giant killer croc makes its home underneath a now abandoned hag's hut. And they get to the scene. Strange mists lurk across the murky depths of the swamp. Little fronds and islands of vegetation and earth pockmark as you make your approach, with just deep enough water to move maybe a small raft in between. But the heavy logs move with unnerving intentionality between those mounds through the water. The buzzing of flies can be heard in the distance, and strange things skitter underneath when the water is disturbed. They gird their wares, gather their weapons, focus their spells, and find there's an evil warding on this place. What challenges lie ahead? Well, that's for our adventurers to figure out. Not me.
Jody, let's gather around the fire and talk about this truly excellent encounter. Let me just say that I was a player at the table playing my now quite beloved, I would be very sad if he died, beloved level 2 wizard, who's just a real cool guy. And
Dwarven wizards, don't sleep on them.
No, don't sleep on dwarven wizards. The party as a whole is just really great. It's just a really great campaign. So kudos to you for getting this thing off the ground so quickly. And I think it feels like it has been going longer than it has, which I think is a great sign. But let's talk about this encounter in particular. So from my point of view, the encounter was chaotic. It was bananas. I'm sure we'll talk about all the kind of crazy stuff that happened. And I think actually some of it includes some of the stuff we talked about last week. So
yep.
maybe we can actually ground that topic in something reasonable. But what I wanted to do from the get-go, from the top here, Jody, this was a boss battle. And we all sort of understood that. I mean, like you said, we went and got information, and I think, big pat on the collective party's back for spending the time to get information. And then also thank you to you for giving us actionable information as the GM. I think that made the whole encounter just better. But what I want to do is I want to start with, is this an encounter that you got straight from the Saltmarsh book? We had talked a little bit about, you're picking and choosing pretty, small little bits. Was this a big bit? Was this a small bit? What's the where's the basis for this encounter?
Yeah, so this comes from Danger at Dunwater, which is the follow-up to Sinister Secrets of Saltmarsh, both of which are found in the 5e book, The Ghosts of Saltmarsh. And Danger at Dunwater is fascinating in that it is a really robust adventure, even by old school standards. There's a lot there. And it's strange because you're in this giant lizard mound and you're going to do this diplomatic mission and this whole thing, but it's largely a role-playing session. Like the whole adventure can be done without ever drawing a blade, and in fact is easier if you don't. And the funny thing is this crocodile fight is like a footnote of like, well, if you wanted to throw this extra thing in because you need a little more, try this. Yeah, I was like, no, that's the part I want. That sounds awesome. I'm doing that part first. Like that's the whole. So I basically threw out 99% of the adventure to keep this one encounter with this croc, who is just a big, by kind of classic fantasy RPG standards, is a dire crocodile, but that's not a thing in Shadow Dark. So I had to figure out, okay, so you're going to go fight this thing. And the first kind of hurdle I had once I went, I'm just going to cherry pick this one encounter out of this whole module, and that's going to be the module basically, is that I had to figure out one versus many just doesn't work well in most D20 fantasy games. Like it's just not a great scenario when I have 5 to 6 adventurers and they're all going to gang up on one thing. I rarely am able to make that a really enjoyable experience. So I had that hurdle, if you will, set before me of like, I want to build a boss battle that is going to be satisfying on multiple levels and give the players lots of things to do and interact with and really, play. Worth noting, why baby boss battle is the party has 2 level 1 characters, 2 level 2 characters, and a level 3 character. And the level 3 character is a witch, which when it comes to fighting and killing a monster that's not what witches do well. That is not their like, we're here to deal damage and just take stuff down. That's not why you bring a witch. That's the witches do other things. So it was doubly kind of had to be careful about how do I build an interesting boss battle with this giant croc that targets low level characters. So that was kind of the thinking and the origins of the whole dang thing.
Yeah, so when you went to design this then, did you design the croc first or did you design... Because I want you to walk us through, there were lots of layers, right? And it would be tedious to walk through every single little detail, but kind of, can you lay out the various layers of this encounter? So the big baddie, the setting, etc., and kind of then... where did you and talk about where did you start? Like, what was the first thing that you kind of nailed down?
Yeah, I had to start with the croc himself. His name's Thousand Tooth, and described him as though it's a giant croc. And thankfully, we use models to represent combat. And thank you again for letting me use your cool little swampy mound.
Oh, sure. I'm glad they got used.
Dungeons and Lasers was rad. It was perfect, along with some other pieces I have, and. But the croc was Thousand Tooth had to get designed first. So thankfully, I already had a giant, like a comedically large crocodile miniature. Yeah. He was quite big. And then described him as though he had like shark-like teeth in his mouth, but it still looked like a croc. So like rows of alligator teeth. And I was like, okay, got the picture in my head. Went into the 5e book and looked up what his deal is, like how have they powered up a crocodile. And it was okay. And probably could have rolled with that. But then I was remembering some of our recent discussions about random tables, and Jody, why don't you use more random tables? You should be using random tables. So I actually went in the rule book and I rolled on the like swampy random table book, and it was no help, and I got nothing out of it. Like I often complain about with the like, go to a location and here's a random event. So that was no good. And then I remembered in the monster section, this is one of our go-to pieces of advice. Not go look in the monster section for monsters, but if you want monsters to have abilities or power-ups, go look at other monsters. Now, to compound that, there's a table on page 191 of your rulebook called Make It Weird. And what it recommends doing is roll up to 3 mutations per monster, treat mutated monsters as 2 level higher than normal for rolling treasure. So there's these 3 columns of mutations on a D12 table, and I let the dice chuck and went through that. And what I came up with was that he was a burrower, which was strange for a crocodile, so I had to ponder on that. He had AC +2. That's a no-brainer win for a croc. A giant croc is armor class and stuff because he's all scaly. And lastly was an anti-magic field. And I went, well, I have 2 3 casters, ended up with 3 casters. Man, and including your dwarf who has the gotcha turn him into stone stick.
Oh, indeed.
Which is very powerful. And I was like, okay, well, that's interesting, but how do I make that interesting and fun? And from there, just went into the rulebook and started going, well, what monsters have anti-magic? And I don't remember which one it is. There's a couple, and it just says make the DC 15 to cast spells. And I went, okay, that's cool. But then I was like, it needs to be better. And this is what led me to the environment, was why does this croc have an anti-magic field? I could just go, because it's a croc that has an anti-magic field. I could. Meh. That's not very good. So I was like,
Crocs are not known for their anti-magic qualities in most lore.
Yeah, just being too dumb to cast a spell. So the AC, the Burrower. Before I get to the anti-magic, because that played heavily into this session. I want to get to that and why. It also set the map, and that kind of rounds out the answer to your reasonable question of what was the layering. The Burrower, I didn't want him like jumping out of the earth like a boule. I was like, that's the wrong vibe. But then I was like, but if there's a swamp around, he can just be lurking under the water. And that's like the most classic thing ever, right? Is like there's a log and then the croc comes jumping out. You thought it was a log, but it was actually a croc, and then you're in death roll. And so I was like, okay, Burrower done. AC, absolutely. Nobody's going to bat an eye at that this croc has 16 AC instead of 14. Because the crocodile that's in the Shadow Dark book is pretty gnarly. So the anti-magic field is where the whole thing about the Hag's Hut came in, of why is this croc such a problem? And I went, well, what if the croc is infused with evil magic from some kind of bog or swamp hag? And then I started thinking about the setting, and I went out to my collection of toys and models and miniatures and found that I had a cool little, bone carved hut model. And then I have a neat little cave, and then just got to thinking about, okay, how do I lay out this swamp terrain in this environment? And then how do I make that an interesting, interactive environment? For boss battles, this is probably the most common thing you hear on the internet, is like, make the environment a key part of it, make it interactable. Yeah. So we had islands to hop from, plus you guys had your super cool raft you'd thrown together on a moment's notice.
That raft will never die.
Now that, spoilers, they get back to Saltmarsh, the thought of that there's this janky little like river raft floating out by the end of the docks with these galleons and these trade ships.
We're paying for a slip.
Yep. I just like I love that picture in my head. So the anti-magic field came about because of the random table roll. And this is actually where random tables work well for me, is the monster mutation table, where it's like just a word. And it's like this, and it's like, okay, now figure out how that works. Detailed descriptions don't work well for me. And that's why the like location encounter ones don't work. So when it just says anti-magic field, well, yeah, I could go spells just don't work. That's taking away your fun completely. And so I went to the monster thing, and I was like, okay, well, it's DC 15 in the hag zone with like the mist over the water, and you guys asked some questions, and your wizard was particularly interested in like, why is that? And I was like, okay, well, there's this miasma, this just like toxic anti-magic and that's fighting against you while you're here. And it's like, okay, well, then now we got to figure things out. And hilarity ensued for like 2.5, 3 hours of one encounter, which was crazy.
Yeah. So we rolled initiative, and we've, as we said before, we both, Jody, you and I, run using individual initiative. We don't use the kind of rules as written initiative in the Shadow Dark book. And we stayed in those initiative rounds for like 2.5 hours. And it wasn't all combat. And I don't even really know how I want to attack this. So I got to kind of, because it was so chaotic, and I'm trying to think through it chronologically, and things just went off the rails immediately. One thing I want to say is that right from the top is that this choice that you made to make spells DC 15 was very interesting, and it led me as a player and through my character to basically avoid casting spells. And not everybody at the table took that route or that line of thinking, but the character I'm playing is very methodical, and doesn't really like to take risks unless they're extremely calculated. And I was like, well, it makes sense. And also, I saw it as a great opportunity to potentially try to play a wizard almost as if they didn't have any spells. And that was an interesting challenge from a character and a player perspective. So I kind of want to stay on that for a second. This like DC 15, basically through the entire encounter area. The entire encounter zone is just DC 15. So, that's essentially making every spell as hard to cast as a tier 5 spell. We aren't really using, we don't have very many luck tokens to our name. You did hand out a couple, which I think might be interesting to talk about. The luck tokens that you did hand out. When it came to this anti-magic field, was it core to the way that you were thinking about the encounter? Because to me, it feels like, okay, you start with the monster. To me, that feels like something that's a big ask, or not a big ask. That's a big problem for players to solve. It's a big ask for players to kind of engage with something that makes it, frankly, just very difficult to cast spells, and means that you're, potentially ticking off spells off your list. You might very well get to the point where you have no spells. So where did that sit? Like, once you made the decision to kind of, okay, it's DC 15, did that affect any of your other decisions? I know that there was definitely like an off switch that we found eventually. But I want to spend like a bit more time talking about this, because I think, you could interpret it with like less generously and think like, man, that's just punishing for spellcasters. But it didn't feel that way necessarily.
Yeah, I think it's a really fair question. And I think it's one that I did put a fair amount of thought into. So somewhere between, I'm not going to mess with your magic at all, or I'm going to make you cast at disadvantage, which would be frankly worse.
Oh, yeah, I mean,
significantly
regardless
worse
of the math, that just feels worse.
Right.
Yeah.
That's like just begging for miscasts all over the place. I'm laughing about our Friday session the night before where we had 5 miscast table rolls.
Yeah.
It was crazy.
Unbelievable.
Anyway, I digress. Sorry. So on the other end was, somewhere between, I totally let you cast free willy-nilly and I ignore that, all the way up to you just can't cast spells, right? Like that, I saw anti-magic field and you can't cast spells, too bad. Which, for some GMs in the OSR mindset, I cannot tell you how many old modules from BX and AD&D days that there's a list that it says you just can't use these certain spells. You just can't use them, full stop.
Yeah.
End. So if I'm being real honest here, Matt, normally this is one of those, like, I would never tell a player this, but because we record together, you're going to get the straight dope. I'm going to do a boss battle and you have a spell that can just shut off the monster.
Yeah.
That would have ruined, like, it would have been like, well, fun encounter. Ungard rolled more than a 14 or more than a 10 4 times in a row.
Yeah. There's your monster.
We're done.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, I can't have that. But, and maybe this is third ed D&D, me kicking in.
Sure.
I want to do it, air quotes, fair. I want to do it by the letter of the game.
Yeah.
So Pillar of Salt, which is Pillar of Stone, is the wand. It's just proxied over from Pillar of Salt, has a level cap on it of 5th level. You can't turn things that are 5th level or higher into stone. So I went, okay, well, I'd already done that, actually, because once I gave him the 2 levels, a crocodile is actually a level 6 critter.
Right.
The other trade-off, though, was, okay, so I used this Make It Weird table with these 3 mutations. A crocodile has 20 hit points.
Yeah.
It's AC 16, but it only has 20 hit points. For a boss, that's not very much.
No,
it
is not.
When I was considering all these variables, I went, man, okay, yeah, I'm going to make it hard for the casters, and I am not going to let Matt use his and the fight's over button.
Right.
Because that would have been fun.
That would have been not fun for anybody.
Right. And that's a great example of as a GM, I hope I hope. I just said it's a great example. And I'm going to say about a call I made. So way to go, me. But
no. Forge ahead, Jody.
That's a great example of a player optimizing the fun out of a scenario. Not that you would have. And in fact, you just described kind of swing in the other direction of like, I'm going to handicap myself. I will have fun. Watch how hard I can make it. But that's common player behavior, right? Of like, I have an answer. I'll just turn the dragon into stone. I'm all done now. We win. Let's go home. There are so many internet stories of, and they're on a 20, you chop off the head, and my 6-month campaign ended with a single swing of a sword, and we were done, and we don't. Yeah, you don't want that to happen. So the punishing spells was one. I fell victim to the I'm already backing off from you, just can't cast magic, which would have sucked. I went and found something in the rules that said, hey, just make it a 15 to cast. That's a anti-magic thing. Okay, I can live with that. It's hard, but it doesn't take spell casting off the table. It just makes it harder. Literally makes it hard by the fixed DCs. And then it also answers the problem of the easy button has been removed. So that's all the boxes I was checking.
Well, yeah, this is interesting because, like you said, you add 2 levels. So you added 2 levels to a level 4 character or creature, making it level 6. And so fast forwarding through the session and just kind of using the topic at hand as a segue, you allowed the wand to work later because I used it towards the end of the encounter in a pretty dire situation. And I want to ask you, like, you could have said no, and frankly, you could have just you knew that this thing was level 6. You could have said no from the beginning. But if I'm reading this correctly, you didn't want to say no in that way. You wanted a more elegant and kind of interesting narrative solution. Is that what you're?
Yeah, definitely. I wanted it to feel grounded.
Okay.
That when you as players were interacting with the scene. And I was thrilled that on more than one occasion in our 4+ hour session, somebody would say like, oh, that makes sense. Oh, well, of course that works that way.
Yeah.
And like different players said it, which was like, yes. So I wanted why is there a magic problem here? And then why did I back off it? And did it wrong, air quotes, on purpose. Once you started casting Pillar of Stone on the crocodile and allowing it, you guys had gone through a lot to get to the point where you had broken the magical field.
Yeah.
And I didn't want that to go unrewarded. Also, we were at clearly the apex point of the battle. I could have had Thousand Tooth lunge underwater and make you chase him. That would have sucked at that point. Like, let the players kill the thing. Like, yes, he's an ambusher. He's ambushed you guys 3 separate times. It's time to just let the fight reach its conclusion. Your casting of the spell and saying, no, I'm going to let this work, but it's the ebbing of the magic in my mind. It's the ebbing of the magic's allowing it. It's going to make him operate at disadvantage as long as you keep focus on him.
Right. He's not actually going to turn to stone.
Right. And I think I narrated that, like, you could see him like, it's like fighting against it and it's not working. And on a long enough timeline, I could have done something where I said like, and eventually he just shakes it off and he's just too big and bad for it. And, but it was more narratively satisfying. And this is classic me that frankly, some GMs are not going to be okay with this. If bending the rules is going to tell a better story, I am more than happy to bend the rules.
Yeah.
And I am okay with when I make those calls for me. Does that mean sometimes I'm making arbitrary calls about how that goes? Yeah, it does. And it just has to feel grounded in the moment, which is why I made the call. When you guys sent multiple people through a 5-room dungeon to go figure out how to break this thing.
Yeah, we split the party hardcore.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you did. And it was great.
In 4 different ways. I mean, like, literally, we talked about this last week, and normally I wouldn't bring up this
we try not to
a past episode so much, but if you haven't listened to last week's episode, it's sort of a rambling set of ideas that have no, and it's mostly me. But what I think was in thinking about kind of the scene, and during our conversation, what I was realizing was there was some kind of ephemeral thing that happened in that session that we were talking about last time that I wasn't able to capture in words. And I think I have what makes splitting the party work. I think I actually can kind of wrap my head around it because I was on the other side of it. And I now literally within a 2-week stretch, we've just had like all these wonderful moments. And I think what I'm realizing is, and this is not going to be news to very many GMs, but it is an ephemeral thing. It's pacing, right? Like what made this session work and what made the splitting of our party. So to kind of set it up, I was on the raft alone because my character is
in love with a raft,
is truly in love with the raft, but also is taking calculated risks and understands that dude is a wizard, has 8 hit points, which is a lot for a wizard at level 2, but also don't be squishy, can't cast mage armor because it's a DC 15 to cast and blah, blah, blah. We had our 2 fighting men, kind of our barbarian and our fighter off fighting the beast, and then we had our witch and our cleric or our priest cruising around in this dungeon. I mean, that was like 1, 2, 3, 4 separate things, and we were moving around the table very quickly. And we did the thing that literally last episode we said was the worst possible circumstance, Jody.
Yeah, you have 2 people in exploration rounds and 3 people in combat rounds.
And one of me, I'm not even really doing combat. I'm just moving this stupid raft around, trying to get it into like optimal position. All that is to say, what I thought you did well, and what I'd like to think that I do reasonably well, and that we were really kind of dancing around last episode, is this idea of pacing. And pacing not in terms of we were moving around the table fast, because the things did slow down sometimes. You had to describe a whole dungeon room sometimes.
Or a room with a gimmicky trap.
Yeah.
or a mechanism, yeah.
But what felt right was the arc of this session. And because what you were saying is like that you knew that the combat was reaching its peak, and so you kind of allowed this thing to happen. I felt like you really nailed the kind of that rising tension and rising action, the thing that we all want from, we all want it to happen organically, and it did, but you really did a great job of I don't know, taking this kind of chaotic energy that we were bringing to the encounter, and you didn't ever say no, and you really did a great job of moving around the table at a good clip. But you also took that chaotic energy and kind of, I don't know if you were doing this consciously or not, but you took it and you kind of pushed it in a direction. You molded it into something that meant that we didn't get ourselves into a situation where we played ourselves out of the fun. Like, you allowed us to have an open world, and yet we didn't do things that led to a stagnation of the encounter. It always felt like it was building. And so I don't know. How did you feel about that element? Did you build that into the encounter? Because it really felt organic and like my decisions mattered. And I don't know, I could go on and on about this because it was the thing that I felt the most strongly.
I'm glad the pacing worked for you. It was a conscious decision. In the background, something I haven't even touched on yet is I had a timer going, and I used our crawling clock in a way we haven't before. A simple D4 timer would have been just as effective, and maybe even would have been better, honestly. There were little tiny critters that wanted to eat and interact with you out in the scene. And I think they're a good example of this building tension and frustration. And so let me kind of unpack those. I had...
Sure.
Not giant leeches. I mean, they were ostensibly giant leeches in the water that were telegraphed that they were there. The lizard folk had told you, don't get in the water. It's very dangerous.
We got in the water.
You got to, yeah. I mean, you found the croc in the best possible way. Let me jump on a log, and the log jumped out and tried to eat you. It was great. Anders, anyway, our intrepid barbarian. But then there was also this buzzing, and like the witch's familiar had kind of gone and done a little recon and was like, there's these giant flies and they're going to eat me. What the hell? Why'd you send me out there? I'm glad I made it back, you jerk. And good luck. And the flies were a riff on Sturges that had 2 hit points. And if they latched onto you, they did 1 point of damage ever. But they caused disadvantage when these ooze flies were like stuck to you, and they would just get on you. And like, imagine a, about 6-inch sized fly that's made of gel and ooze is in your face flapping its wings, and it's stuck on you and it's slowly feeding on you. It's super annoying. That was designed because Ranger that trucks out a ton of damage. I was like, well, how do I make his life hard? Oh, like this. Well, I need something magical for players to do. So this is starting to get into the like, how do players have things to do? So I just leaned into the index card RPG notion of the 3 T's: timers, threats, and treats. And that the beauty of that tool, at least as I'm seeing it, is that it creates pacing. And when that's coupled with a world that feels grounded, like the scene we talked about last week of like, there's this prisoner being taken and we all run amok and there's chaos everywhere in the streets, and it felt grounded. We all knew what was going on. We all saw a similar version of the scene in our head, the scene that was painted in the swamp that we just played. Everybody saw what was going on there, and then it was just a matter of leveraging those things and finding the treats, being aware of the threats, and then, hey, there's this timer and stuff's going to keep happening, and giant tentacles and leeches and ooze flies, and life's going to be hard. So it's managing that with always the clear goal at the end of, what are we doing here? Which is, as a player, I think any GM has heard their players say this of, wait, what are we doing here? I mean, it happens, but you guys never had to question why you were there.
No, we not only did we not have to question it, but what was lovely about the encounter was the session. Over half the session was one combat encounter, and what I felt like was, you did a great job of telegraphing danger, both through the recon we did prior to leaving the Lizard Man hovel or like base mound. Mound, that's the word. It's a mound. So that was great, the upfront information, but also the information that you gave us prior to really kicking off the encounter itself. I don't know. I felt like we learned things throughout the encounter. We learned things before the encounter, and those treats, that's actually something that I'm kind of realizing maybe I have stumbled ass backwards into more often than I would like to admit is treats, those things that make players do things, the big red button, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think both you and I are pretty good at putting big red buttons in our games. But the trick is to make those big red buttons have some kind of payoff. Like you don't want them to be purely bad. And that was the beautiful thing, is that nothing that we did ended up being purely negative, right? Like we got information or whatever. It wasn't also purely good, right? It was dangerous. We had to rely on die rolls and interesting lateral thinking, and everybody at a certain point was thinking creatively. And like you said, again, last episode, almost no one at any point looked at their sheet for answers. And there were numerous times where I would quickly look at my inventory because I was lighting so many torches. But other than that, it was like, those are my spells. That's my inventory. I ain't looking at anything else. And that's how I felt with everybody. And so what I want to ask you is, from your side of the table, that was kind of one of the most satisfying things for me, was the pacing and the fact that it felt like everyone was like living in the scene. Was that the thing that was most satisfying for you? Because I'm getting the feeling that you felt like this was a success, and I think it was. What did you feel like was maybe the biggest success? And if you can, maybe kind of tie in some of the other encounters that you've run that have been successful, or encounters that I've run. If you want to make me feel better, you can reference something that I've done. I mean, that'd be nice of you.
Yeah. So, yeah. Wow. So, yeah. So, yeah, that's a good question because there was a lot of parts to it. And now I'm spinning. Two things were my big successes that I felt good about at the end. I was very tired. I noticed when we were done playing that my brain was squishy. And that was being always on initiative in combat rounds for that long did take a bit of a toll. And I was unaware of it, though, until I was done. Kind of like, you do something really fun and exciting, and then you get home and you're like, oh, I'm tired now from doing that. And was. One of the big successes that I took away was everybody got to do cool things. And I think more than once. I think everybody had multiple scenes that were interesting and cool. The witch and our new water priest had a really made a very simple kind of little water elemental, water weird puzzle lock room that was a lot of fun through some charisma play. Our first level dwarven fighter who spent an unconscionable amount of time in the jaws of the croc, but had like wedged these goo flies into its mouth while it was gnawing on him because they said it gives disadvantage. So smart player goes, well, did they give the croc disadvantage? And so he's like started cramming the flies as they were swarming him in. So he spent many rounds in this croc's mouth, just getting dragged around, which was rad because it bought you guys time. And then had a weird encounter with a ghost at the end that just
outstanding.
Suddenly this dwarf is sweet talking this cool spectral lady over the water. And it was awkward and wonderful. So everybody, you got to ram somebody with the raft.
Oh, dude,
that was awesome.
I rammed a fly with the raft that was that had a torch nicely placed right at the front just to singe the backside of this fly.
And the barbarian multiple times did here is my giant axe two-handed swing launch into the air overhand chop, which is like the thing that so everybody got a cool moment, and I really enjoyed that. The DM part of me, so the hanging out with my friends and did something cool, that's the that was rad. The DM planning, I played this game all by myself and then we sat down and played it together. DM brain, I used everything I planned.
Ooh.
If I gave you my one pager for my session notes, I could cross everything off. There is nothing left to you have seen that entire adventure. We cannot go back. I do not want to replan it. But literally
good to know.
Everything. And then there's a bonus note at the end because one of my players said something terrible. And I was like, I hadn't thought of that. That's a great idea. This whole thing should collapse. And I was like, no.
Yeah, I had to clarify. Does it look like it's about?
No. So for a GM, that was a really rare treat of I prepped all this stuff. And the 5-room dungeon that was the Hag's Hut was like a very last minute addition just because I was like, well, what if they go in the Hag's Hut to cancel the magic thing? That makes sense. How can I make that cooler? Oh, here's a cool Dice and Logos 5-room dungeon. Let me turn that 5-room dungeon into a little actual 5-room dungeon and then put some interesting, fun discoveries. And again, that piece of like every time we did something, there was another thing behind it. And then behind that thing was a hammer. And inside the hammer was a smaller box. And I've messed this up really badly, but you get where I'm going. Yeah.
So that's awesome. And this is something that I think is different because, to pull back the curtain, right? I barely prep almost anything for our Dolmenwood game anymore. I mean, my notes are sometimes there are none. Sometimes I literally start a session with no notes and just an idea for how to start, and that is it. The last couple of sessions notwithstanding, I have had a dungeon, which I'm very excited to talk about. But the idea that you used everything you prepped is such a genuinely lovely and like wonderful
just feeling. Never happens.
It just, it never happens. But one thing that I think you and I both enjoy, but don't often necessarily have not just an opportunity to do, but because of the way that Shadowdark wants you to run the game, we're sort of incentivized not to do, is encounter design. You and I both really like encounter design. I get to do that a lot in my 5th edition game that I run. And that's kind of where I get to kind of hone that skill and all that. I don't really get to do it very often in our Dolmenwood game, and certainly not in our Sunday game where we're just dungeon crawling and it's a lot more about, exploration and et cetera, et cetera. And so I don't want to belabor that point, but you got to do it in a way that was satisfying from a GM standpoint. And that's just super cool. And my kind of final question that I wanted to ask you was, first of all, why you didn't mention anything cool that I've done, which is fine. But, I did ask you to point out maybe a couple things that I did well, but I don't take it personally. But the thing that I want to kind of end with as a question is, at the risk of getting into our last segment of takeaways, what did you learn? Or because you got to use everything, which is very rare, which means that you got to see the entire encounter play out, right? And there are no question marks. You got to see everything. That is it's a rare place to be able to analyze and think about an encounter where everything got used, all the parts of the buffalo. Give me kind of a learning or something that you realized. Was there anything? Is there a time during the encounter where you were like, oh, a nugget? I have found a nugget.
Yeah, and this takes me to an example of a scenario you ran, actually. Hey, look at that. Ask and you shall receive. Sometimes you just got to ask twice because I'm not that smart.
I'm just over here fishing for compliments, Jody.
Yeah.
Don't mind me.
So 2 come to mind, actually. You infamously killed in a 5e game a paladin of mine who had been kind of the rallying point for a group of very new players.
Sure.
We had intentionally been like, hey, I'm going to run a paladin.
And they never caused the death of your character again.
Yeah, wouldn't that have been nice? No, they've moved on to just killing them themselves. But there was a combat with a big demon, and there were other demons in the room, and there were other things going on. And it was just a hectic, chaotic environment. And so that is actually an area I really had wanted to leverage, and is one of my big takeaways. And the thing I'm kind of wanting to build from is the notion of the chaotic environment with the mist and the swamp and I use the quick explanation of the ground is hot lava. It's just here, it's water, so it won't burn you. You can jump in it all you want. You're just very sure there are things in there that want to eat you, namely a huge crocodile. So that just playing hopscotch was like, oh, that's a cool environment thing to do. I want to do that. And then multiple small risk, just irritating elements. The 15 to cast doesn't make it impossible. It's just really annoying. This fly gets on you and it's latched on and will cause disadvantage. So you can tear it off of you, but you're going to give up your round tearing the fly off of you instead of, and that those little irritations were really valuable. And that chaos from that scene with the big demon that killed this paladin, and was a super cool, touching scene, death. And also, 3 years later with that same group now in Dolmenwood, is I think was a really good learning point of like, hey, you guys, we also can play the game, because they didn't realize they could have saved that character like multiple rounds over, and it was like, well,
right. I mean, there was a mechanical lack of information there,
right?
Yeah.
So, but also leveraging a scene, right, and like both mechanically and narratively. So that was one. The second scene and the second big takeaway I have that I don't know if you saw, and I was curious. I'm actually very curious if you saw it when I was doing it. One of the times was obvious, but there were multiple. We had a scene years ago where we, as a group of adventurers for a game you were running, there was this possessed tree that had like tainted a whole village. Yeah. And it had cool eyeballs sprouting out of it, and we were going to attack the tree. But there was the tree was doing things, but then also the huts all around it had things going on in them. And I remember one of the players went into one of the huts and found somebody, an NPC that was really important. And then the fight was going outside, and there was lots of chaos in the environment with the big central monster. And it was great. My question is, did you know what was in those huts before we ever sat down to play? Did you know what all of, because there was lots of pieces of information. Yeah. And again, something that hopefully doesn't ruin future games for you with me as a GM and you as a player is there were many pieces of Quantum Ogre information. Yeah. And some of them were just something interesting here, ? For me. Like, that's what I knew. I was like, if they interact with this, I will tell them as much as I possibly can, depending on what they do.
Yeah. So
that's the treat. It was like, I don't know, but it'll be good.
So I know that a lot of, and I know that a lot of people don't like this, and I think both you and I do it. We had a conversation about this, but I will leave entire dungeon rooms empty for this exact purpose, so that I can, on the fly, design a dungeon room in my head. At the risk of undermining a very significant scene from our last Dolmenwood game, there was a room that was filled with fungus, and it was a blank room at the beginning of the session until you guys walked to it. Now, I was pretty obviously rolling on tables, and there's an element of that dungeon that I hope we can talk about in a future show, that it was shifting and there was a lot of generative stuff. And so I don't think it necessarily undermines the nature of it. But what I love about being a player, and it's something that I'm trying to work on more and more, but what I love about being a player is you can just play. You don't have to worry about whether or not the GM had this planned. And I actually find that element of being a player, which I have done in the past, I actually find it to be bad. Like
it's a bad play habit.
I don't like it, and I know that I've done it in the past. Again, I'm trying to be better. I am trying to be better, Jody. But what I find that it does is it just removes the joy from playing. And so the answer is, I didn't see you doing that at all. And I had no idea it was happening. And I don't care. Knowing that you do that or not, I just don't care, because what matters is the feeling of the game. And what in this encounter, what it felt like was, it felt like a perfect arc of a session. And like that's all that matters. Like the information we were getting, like you said, and people were like, "Oh, that makes sense. That makes sense. That makes sense." That's all that matters.
Right.
You know, you just got to get them to pass the refrigerator test. And quite frankly, like when I right, like when I look back on that session, there actually isn't anything that if I put on my GM brain, or that, you know, that my lovely wife has a habit of, whenever we're watching a movie or a TV show, that she just like pokes holes in the plot all the time. And I constantly am just like, this is a fictional thing. Why are you?
Those wizards.
There's no reason that man would walk into that house. He knows it's haunted. It's like he has to go in there. That's the whole premise of the show. But it's that I love about being a player. And so I don't really have a point to this other than to say that I think you did a great job, and I didn't notice if you were quantum informationing stuff, which is sort of the nature of, I think, how both of us prep. We prep a lot of information and drop it in where it makes sense.
You know what we should drop in right now?
An advertisement from our lovely sponsor.
It's time, baby.
Dungeon Master Diaries is brought to you by Critical Coverage, the only insurance designed specifically for crawlers. Look, let's be honest, when torches only last an hour, it's not if something's going to go wrong, it's when. Have you ever found yourself scrambling to stabilize your fighter after a surprise pit trap? Or worse, realizing you are in a life or death situation and completely out of luck? That's where Critical Coverage comes in. They offer comprehensive plans that protect against all the classic dangers of the Shadowdark: collapsing ceilings, poisonous bites, cursed treasure, and of course, good old-fashioned zombies. Here's the best part. Critical Coverage doesn't ask how you got into trouble in the first place. Failed to light a torch in the darkness? Covered. Drank a potion labeled probably fine? Covered. Caused a massive spell mishap that targeted the entire party? You're covered. And if you sign up for their Crawler Advantage plan, You even get partial reimbursement for gear that gets destroyed by rust monsters or oozes or just rolling a natural one. Don't wait until your next crit fail to think about coverage. Visit criticalcoverage.sd today to get a free quote, and your first month is free. Because in the Shadowed Arc, the light always goes out, but your coverage doesn't have to. All right, Jody, let's bring this topic into the light with some core takeaways. What's your first one?
All right. Well, kicking us off, you started with a very reasonable question, especially for a show called DM Diaries that in theory gives you our listeners stuff to talk about and think about is, so what was your order of approach? And then we meandered through an hour-long discussion. So here's my now learned order of approach. 1, what's your big boss? Figure that out. 2, what's your environment? Put the big boss in an interesting place. 3, what are the hurdles that prevent the players from just smashing the easy button and smashing the big boss? Not so much that they can't get it done, but just annoying. A fly in the ear is a magical annoyance. It just bothers everybody. So that's my 1, 2, 3 is just try that order and see where it gets you. Or tell me what I missed.
Sure. Well, Jody, you don't ever have to apologize for not being clear, concise, and coherent after my performance last week. So, number 2, quote, yeah, that makes sense, end quote. That is what you're looking for. And it sometimes, what makes sense in your head doesn't make sense to players. So you can't get it all the time. But ideally, you want to make choices as a GM when you're designing these kind of set piece big encounters that'll have the players saying out loud or thinking, yeah, that makes sense. And of course, you can always go back to, in a world with magic, et cetera, there's always a way to, quote, make things make sense. But there is that nice intersection of the fantasy world where you can kind of make an excuse for anything happening meets people's expectations. That's where you want to be.
Yeah, expectations are key. Go ahead and lean into them. Another thing is, how do I do that? So how do I lean into those expectations? Well, here's my last takeaway. Quantum information. It's much better than a quantum ogre because it's a treat and not a threat. Have some nuggets of information that if your players are getting lost in a scene, especially in a combat where they're stressed out and they're nervous, and have some pieces and some places that they can poke at in the environment that will tell them things, and then you can just adjudicate what it tells them. But it's some additional truth. It's maybe there is a missing scale underneath this dragon that you didn't notice before. But now that you're up on this high pedestal, you can see that, and you couldn't see it before. So, man, this dragon that's about to cause a TPK that I really didn't intend to cause a TPK, suddenly now there's an out, and they're going to take that out. So, yeah, some quantum information, anywhere from just a little spice for the seasoning all the way to a get-out-of-jail-free card. It's not a bad idea to have a few of those in your pocket.
Yeah, that's not going to be to everybody's taste, Jody, but I do think it's a worthy consideration for sure. And my last one is interactivity and potential energy. I think we've talked about this before on the program, but it's worth repeating that you did a great job of creating a monumentally interactive and a scene that was just filled with the potential for things to happen, logs that could be leaped upon and then turn out to be a crocodile. I mean, it's classic stuff, and that's the kind of thing that you're looking for in an environment, in an encounter like this.
All right, friends, as the torchlight grows dim, we hope you were able to find something useful in this episode that you can take into a future game. If you have any questions or unique experiences from your table that you'd like us to discuss in a future episode, you can email us at dmdiariespod, all one word, @gmail.com. You can also reach out to us via YouTube or Facebook, but best of all, you can get at us on the Dungeon Master Diaries thread on the Shadow Dark Discord channel. You can find links to those feeds and any of the materials we referenced in this episode's show notes. Until next time, may your taverns be light and your shadows be dark.
Whoa, the new one, Jody. Dungeon Master Diaries is produced and, oh my God, it's a production of the Stingbat Radio Network. It's produced by Jody Kropholler and edited by Matt Bruner. Our intro and outro music is composed by Christian Schuster. We're going with it. One take. Dungeon Master Diaries is an independent production, is not affiliated with the Arcade Library, LLC. Shadow Dark RPG is a part of the Arcade Library. Copyright 2023. Yikes.